welcome to the very first edition of the Raceday review. My name is Joe. You can find me on Twitter at JoeJets19. Also, my Twitch channel is twitch.tv/JoeJets19, and you can find me on DraftKings and Twitter, also JoeJets19. I am the NASCAR writer for LineStar. They are a leading DFS analytics company. They provide research, they provide tools, and I write their NASCAR newsletter. So for the playoffs, I'm starting a new thing where I'm going to try to do a review of the previous race. There aren't too many reviews for NASCAR right now, right? You'll see a whole bunch of preview shows. Stevie had a preview show. A lot. DFS Army has a preview show. And that's good and nice, and I even read the article, which isn't a show, but it's something that you can do to see what's going to happen in the upcoming race. But no one really looks at what happened at the previous race. Now, I find this very interesting because you can use a lot of the things from one race and see how it goes at similar tracks, and maybe you can pick up on something that you might not have seen. So, we just finished up at Indianapolis, which was a very exciting race, but Harvick absolutely dominated. I was not really expecting that to happen because a lot of the last couple of perfect lineups did not have. Two of them had drivers that led a whole bunch of laps, 80 or more laps, but only one time did a driver that led that many laps actually end up in the perfect lineup, and that's because Kyle Busch ended up finishing 8th, and some other drivers outscored him. Now, this is a very weird week because qualifying was actually only a couple hours before the first. Qualifying was actually a couple hours before the start of the race, and with the first day of NFL happening, there wasn't that much excitement for this race. So Indianapolis was a very weird race because of their scheduling. They had 2 practices on Saturday, and they had inspection Saturday, and then they impounded the cars, and qualifying was not until Sunday morning. Since it was going up against the very first weekend of NFL, there really wasn't a lot of buzz around this weekend, this race, and there were also the contests were cut in half, cut drastically. You'll see that the first gear, which was their main tournament, went from $250,000 as a total prize all the way down to $100,000, and the Chrome Horn, which has been holding pretty steady at $100,000 per weekend, went down to $40,000. Now, what really hampered most people who were trying to figure out what was going on with this race was because qualifying happened so short. There was such a short amount of time in between qualifying and the start of the race. Research was really difficult to do. Now, as I looked over the past couple of perfect lineups, I saw a couple things that we wanted to say. I was going into qualifying thinking that we were going to want at least 1 to 2 drivers starting in the top 11. In the last three perfect lineups and the last 3 races here, there's only been one at max 2 drivers that started in the top 11 and finished in the perfect lineup. And most of the time that had to do with picking up a couple of spots and then also leading a couple of laps. So I didn't know who was going to start in the top 10, but I figured at least 1 or 2 of them were going to hang on for a little bit and make it into the lineup. Then after that, we were going to want to balance it out with drivers that started for a little bit further back, but that we think could finish in the top 15. Again, that's very broad, especially when we don't know exactly who's starting there, but at least if you go in with that mindset, we'll have a good idea of what's going to go on. So as you see who actually did make the perfect lineup, Ty Dillon starting 25th, finished 13th. Bubba Wallace starting 15th, finished 3rd. Hamlin started 33rd. Now he was one of my favorite plays of the weekend. And the reasoning is because we knew that absolutely positively, we had no idea where anyone was going to start, except we knew Hamlin was going to start in the rear because he crashed at the very end of the second practice. So knowing that no matter what happened, he wasn't going to be scored from the rear, but we could use that to his advantage. But we knew we were going to start from the rear. It turns out that he qualified pretty poorly, and he started 33rd. So even though he had to, so he was scored from 33rd, even though he started 40th. But that's all right. If we knew that that's what we were going to, we knew that since he was going to start so far back, that his ownership would probably be down, and that was who I was really, 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 really trying to fit into my lineups. Now, I did mention in chat, again, on LineStar, if you guys want to check them out, it's linestar.com. Hamlin, the problem with it being an impound race is they crashed their car very late, out at the very end of second practice, and then they had to roll a car right out of the truck, their backup car right out of the truck, and qualify with it. They couldn't really tinker around with it too much, so he was a big unknown, but it was worth the risk in my assessment. Byron pretty much fell into my lap. He had awesome practice times, as we'll see. I'll pull up this over here. William Byron's practice times were 182 miles an hour and 182 miles an hour, which ranked him in a weight of the 9th fastest car in single lap times, and I weighted him as the 5th fastest car in 10 lap average. I wanted to figure out if he qualified anywhere between the 20s and the 30s, I figured he was going to be a great person to drive in. I was probably even happy with a 17th or 18th place, depending on where he was, and as long as I thought he would be able to finish in the top 10. And then finally, Newman was very interesting. I wrote him up in my article because he was on the bubble and he was tied with Suarez. He was a little bit more expensive than Suarez, but he was also starting a couple of places further back. Sorry about that. I should have had this set up for you already. This is the model that I built. I'm going to get there in a little bit. I'll point that out to you, but I'm just going to use this as a reference for right now. Ryan Newman. Ryan Newman was starting Newman started 22nd. He was about $8,300 as opposed to Suarez's $7,500. But Suarez was starting, sorry, I'm getting down here, starting 20th. So he's starting 2 spots further, but that's the 10th. So Ryan Newman was starting 22nd, and Suarez was starting 20th. The only way that Newman could have made the playoffs was to beat Suarez. And Suarez, I thought, had a good car this weekend. Neither one of them practiced very well, but his average finish in the last 3 races here was a 12.5, and he averaged about 2 places picked up. And Newman also averaged only a 14.6, but as you see, he averaged in a loss of places. Now what that means is he probably qualified in the top 10 roughly, and on average he would qualify in the top 10 and then fall back to the top 14, 15. Now if you go to I actually have 9 similar tracks, 9 similar races this year that were very similar to Indianapolis, and that's who I used as a comparison. And so there's, in the last 9 races this year at similar tracks, Newman averaged a finish of 14.3, while Suarez was averaged a finish of 11.3. So there wasn't anything that really told me one was better than the other. So neither one of these guys were going to be dominators. I had no idea. I had no hope in them being able to get up front and lead laps. So that was neither here nor there. That wasn't a consideration. My next consideration was, will they lock up fastest laps? you can't really predict fastest laps. Neither one of them had a very fast car, so that would be pretty hard for them to do too. The only way that Newman was going to outscore Suarez was by finishing better than them, and they had the entire race to do that. I don't care what happened on lap 1 to 100, as long as at lap 170 they were there, 160. As long as at lap 160 he was in front of Suarez, that's all that he was going to race for, and that's why I thought that Newman had a better shot. He's been making this entire year, making his bones about finishing well even when he hasn't had a good car, and this is the race that he absolutely did it. Needed to do it, and that's what he did. I wanted to target one of these on a race that you have so much uncertainty. I needed something to grasp onto. I knew Hamlin was going to start pretty far back, so I knew he was going to be a lock, and I knew Newman was going to have to outrace Suarez. So as long as he started somewhere in the 20s, he was going to be a very, very, very good option. Now, Harvick was a relative unknown. Going into it, I had no idea he was going to go on the pole. I wrote up Kyle Busch, mostly because he's the only driver that dominated 2 out of the last 3 races here. But I did add that caveat that he only dominated when he was on the pole. If he wasn't on the pole, he was a little iffy. So he started further back today on Sunday. Kyle Busch ended up starting 7th, and with his crazy salary, which was about $12,000, a little more than $12,000 on DK, he was really going to need to finish, lead some laps, and probably win the race. His practice times were 182 miles an hour and 182 miles an hour in both, which is very close to Byron. And his 10-lap average actually wasn't even as good as Byron's. So considering those two things, I really didn't think that he was great. Harvick was starting first. His single lap speeds were pretty miserable, and his 10-lap speed wasn't great either. But this package, as we've seen time and time again, clean air is king. As long as Harvick could keep the clean air, he would have a chance to dominate, and that's exactly what he did. He had a rough restart that he lost a couple laps led on it, but overall he absolutely positively dominated this race. And as long as it was his race to lose, and his pit team finally didn't, thank God, have any problems or anything like that to cause him any penalties. So that's how now, going into the race, it's very difficult to figure out what was going to happen. So I've started making, as you can see here, a model myself. I don't really ever put this out for anyone, but since I'm trying something new, I'll let you see what's going to happen, what's going on in this thing. So I mentioned it in the article that I wrote, and as a little bit behind the scenes of what I kind of use. So this is the last 3 finish for each driver here. Some of these drivers only ran here once. Some of these drivers didn't run here at all. The rookies is very hard to get a lot of information on. I don't use Xfinity finishes, and the reasoning is, 1, they're running new cars this year. Not them physically, but actually the entire the package for Xfinity is different than the package for NASCAR. So there's not a lot of translation. Plus, some of these guys were on top equipment there and not really great equipment here. So between the caliber of drivers, I've decided, especially later on in the season, that I would translate the similar finishes over to the previous finishes here. And so it kind of double dips on this, and it is a weakness of the models, but it's the best I have going for me now. So I have the last 3 finishes at this specific track. This week it was Indy. Then I have the average place differential for these tracks. So do the drivers generally qualify well and finish poorly? Like you can see over here, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. normally qualifies pretty well and falls back. Blaney finishes normally around 23rd, but he on average starts at about 11th or 12th. So these guys, especially for DFS purposes, you do not want to target because they're going to lose you points left, right, and center. Now the similar tracks. I had 9 similar races this year, and so this is a very good sample size, and this pretty much grabs everyone. You have drivers like BJ McLeod, and LaJoy runs a lot of them, but Garrett Smithley, things like that, that only run 2 or 3 of these races this year, so they're not really, they don't have all 9 options, but anyone that they rate, any race that they have, I inputted here, and this is pretty much this is their average finish. And again, with the place differential, like Paul Menard finishes very well, qualifies very well, doesn't really move around much. So we got the single lap times. I have an average of the single lap time. I weight the practice, one of the practice that has that they don't do qualifying trim in more. And every different track has a different model that you gotta run. If you'll find, I back test these things to find out which ones are more. Sometimes the 10 lap averages is much more predictive than the single lap average. Sometimes the third practice is much more predictive than the second practice or the first practice. So it was a little difficult with the model this year because last year they didn't practice at all. The year before they had a lot of different drivers. So this year was really a crapshoot. But I tried my best to try to string together the best model that I could, just so I have somewhere to go. I had very little information. We had practice times, but absolutely no. But we didn't have qualifying information. I needed to get some stuff done Saturday night just to get the research done and the lineups done and see what's going on. Of course, I didn't build any lineups until Sunday, but it's good to know who I was eyeing in on before qualifying even happened. So just to see what, this is where I ended up ranking everyone. So I'm going to show by the starting position. So Harvick, I actually had projected to finish first. That was more or less a crapshoot, but between his average finishing position at similar races that I was finishing position here, his practice times, his this week's model, the 10 lap average was a much more predictive thing, much more predictive than the single lap time. So that's where he really favored him. So between the 10 lap average and his finishes at Indy and his finishes at similar tracks, that's how he rated out pretty much the best. So that was spot on. This model was, I ran this model because it did not take starting position into account, and that made it a lot easier. So I went into Sunday looking at this and I said, well, Harvick has a good chance of finishing first, top 5. Paul Menard was probably finish in the top 6. Again, not knowing that he started second. If he started in the top 15 or 15 to 25, he would have been an absolute lock and load play like Byron was, just because of his great practice times and his single lap and 10 lap average. But starting second, I didn't think he was really going to be able to beat Harvick off the block, and at that point, all he's going to do is fall backwards. Boyer was going to go. I had a predicted to finish 12th. He actually finished 5th. Logano I thought was going to have a good shot at doing well. He started 5th, but he started 4th. He ended up finishing 2nd, so he did get there in the end, but he just couldn't catch up to Harvick. So when I was building the lineups, again, I was looking, once we got the starting position, I wanted 2 drivers. I was really focusing on 2 drivers in the top 11, and then the rest of the drivers between 10 and 20. 10th, pretty much 10th and 25th, all drivers I think that had a very good ceiling. And as we were going about things, I really started to fall in love with this range. Pretty much Eric Jones all the way back. I ended up going all the way down to Hamlin because he obviously started 33rd and he was someone I really loved. So going in that range, Jones didn't finish very well here, but has a very good finishing position. 16th isn't too bad, but again, he averaged falling back. A 12th finishing position in the similar tracks was pretty good. but he had a fast car and single lap average fast car in 10 lap average, and I really thought that he'd be able to pick up some spots. And really, this was very big. This race really needed drivers that had good finishing position. Listening to podcasts for the last couple of years about DFS NASCAR, I never really understood. Not that I didn't understood. I always thought it was silly that people emphasized races with finishing position, because if you pick up 10 spots, that's 10 points plus the 10 extra points. Who cares if you pick up 10 spots from 30th to 20th instead of picking up 5 spots from 15th to 10th? But you really find in tracks, especially like this, that even drivers going from 11th to 7th, you only pick up 4 spots, but you get so many points for finishing 7th, and you get points for finishing 20th, that's really where you make the big bulk of that's the biggest important thing. I want a driver that might not be able to pick up a bunch of spots, but he's going to do enough to pay off his salary by where he finishes. It sounds pretty basic, but not a lot of people explain it that way, and it clicked probably a year and a half ago before I was writing the articles. But either way, I try to convey that anywhere I can, that yes, I didn't think he had a top 5 potential, but if he started 14th, if he finished 7th, maybe picked up a couple of fast laps because he did have a fast car, he was firmly in play. Bubba Wallace shocked everyone by finishing 3rd. I didn't think he had any chance of doing that, so he wasn't anywhere close, because God forbid he did Bubba Wallace type of things and crashed into someone or tried to spin someone or just hit the wall and only hurt himself, then your day's done. So congratulations for him. He was able to make his way. He got himself a top 3 and made a lot of people a lot of money, because as you see, the perfect lineup actually won the first gear and the chrome horn. I didn't think that was going to happen this week, because there are so many fewer lineups entered, that usually when the fewer lineups that are entered, the less chance of the perfect lineups being the winning lineup. But here we are. One thing I want to mention to you guys, anyone who's listening, is while it's fun to chase the glory and it's fun to chase the cash, there is an 11-point swing between the minimum cash for the $11 first gear and the $4 chrome horn. The chrome horn payout structure is usually pretty terrible, and so the first gear usually does pay out a little better, but the fact that you could score 11 and a quarter points fewer and still min cash, and it's much more affordable. Just play the same lineup in that thing 3 times instead of the one lineup in the first gear, and you make your money at a much easier clip. Again, it's not nearly as fun. You're not chasing 20 grand, but you got to be smart about these things sometimes. So we're going further down. Chris Buescher, I really liked this weekend. I thought he only finished 15th, but he had a good single lap average. His 10 lap speeds weren't great. Top 16 finishes in both similar tracks, as well as this track. Probably shouldn't have been nearly on my radar in hindsight as much as he was. I had a very, very, very narrow player pool, which ended up working out relatively well all until Kyle Larson crashed. When Kyle Larson crashed, I went from 4th in the chrome horn to not cashing. I ended up getting some of that back, but it would have been very nice to put up a screenshot of the 3rd or 4th place team, but Kyle Larson decided to hit the wall. He started 19th, and I thought he had a great shot of pulling the top 10. My model projected him to finish in the top 10. Suarez, we went over with Suarez and Newman, how they weren't even that great. There wasn't really that big of a difference between the two. McDowell didn't really make it there on I just didn't like him. Sure, he was starting 21st, but I thought that he was going to finish probably in the mid to low 20s. Because it turned into a crash fest entirely, he ended up picking up a whole bunch of spots. Priest ended up picking up some spots. Elliott had a chance to do some damage, and he really did. He picked up a top 10 for himself. I'm the type of guy who rosters him when he crashes, and I get away from him when he does things like this. So I just can never get Elliott right. Ty Dillon had himself a day and a half. He actually finished 13th after starting 25th. 25th was my cutoff. I really thought that anyone starting between the 25 and up had a really good chance of making the top 15 was going to make it in the perfect lineup. I missed it with Elliott because he was too expensive. He started 24th, finished top 10, but Newman was there. Suarez didn't make it either because he got outscored by Ty Dillon. Wallace, as we went there. Byron was actually probably the one that kicked Newman out, and Byron, once I found out that he was going to start, where is he? Sorry. Once he finished, he's going to start 29th, with his practice times. He was a affordable piece. He was a nice pivot off of Suarez, and of course you mix and match. You can put some Suarez in some lineups and Byron in others. Neither one of them hurt you. Obviously Byron was in the perfect lineup, so he did great. You could still cash if you went to Suarez over Byron. I can't really argue with you on that. One interesting thing, I wrote Martin Truex up as my fade, even though he loves to crash here, and he's crashed here three of the last 4 races, I believe. He was great at all these similar tracks, but just here he's got a problem. And I fell into the trap. I wrote him up as my fade, which I do think it was a good idea fading him, especially if he's starting in the top 15. But because of Hamlin starting where he started, I thought for sure we would be able to see some ownership go to Hamlin as opposed to Truex, and he would be a nice pivot. He was a nice price decrease. So instead of some Hamlin Harvick lines, we can do some Harvick Truex lines. Those didn't work out too well for me. Even with all of that, I thought he was going to finish 20th. He finished 27th, so he finished where he started, which for the amount of money was just not going to do it for you. So just a couple of the things that we added over here. I had the average running position for Indy and the average running position for the similar tracks. So I was talking about the things that went into the model, and this model didn't have starting position in there, but it had some average running position, some finishing position, and some place differential, things like that. So the playoffs, I'm going to try to run this through the playoffs. The reasoning is because this is when the racing really starts kicking up. Anyone who has any questions or things like that, by all means, you can reach out to me at Twitter, because I'm going to try to make this as interactive as possible. I'm new to this, so I haven't been able to get the live stream up from Twitch, but I'm going to try to get there in the next couple of weeks. Right now I'm just going to record this and upload it myself. So this is what your playoff picture looks like. You have Kyle Busch, who is the point leader right now. He has 2,045 points. He's got a 15-point lead on Denny Hamlin. He has 4 wins to Hamlin's 4 wins to Truex's 4 wins. So they are all some of the top dogs. I see Newman just squeaked in there. Boyer was able to get in there barely. Byron is having himself a hell of a year, usually by qualifying well and finishing well, so it's very good to see him. Eric Jones got in here with his win. Bowman's was very good at 1.5 mile tracks. He had a stretch where he was finishing in the top 5 over and over and over again. Larson loves to hit the wall. He runs the high line, and when he decides to slap a wall, it really kills me every single time. And you can tell that this really isn't an indicator of everything, but when I was uploading everything, I thought it was kind of funny. He has the second fewest miles run in all the playoff contenders, next to Eric Jones, who also has an affinity to walls. So it's going to be very interesting to see. We have Vegas coming up. I want to do a little bit of a Vegas preview for you. And this was quite possibly one of the worst races of the year. It had 2 cautions, and if you know how this works, There are 2 stage cautions. They did not have 1 caution for anything that wasn't a stage caution on in March. This was the first time that we got to see the new aerodynamics package on 1.5 mile tracks, and it was interesting. Not really. Harvick started on the pole and was able to lead 86 laps. Logano ended up catching up to him, and he led 88 laps for himself, and he went on to win. There wasn't one major dominator, so it wasn't great, and even they had the one driver who that was right, and the driver who led the most laps actually didn't even end up in the perfect lineup, and yeah, it's kind of blah. It's funny when I was putting this together to see the different prices. Stenhouse you can get for about $6,300 depending on the week, was $7,900 to start the year. Kurt Busch went a little higher. Byron is now a playoff driver, but they never thought that was going to happen. Buescher made a good run for the playoffs. He didn't get anywhere close, but he's having a career year, and it's great. I love playing this guy, especially. Pretty much the public has caught on to him, so he's not nearly as sneaky as he used to be, but he has been solid and he's been very reliable. So Vegas is a 1.5 mile track. They'll use their standard package with the aeroducts and the low horsepower. They're looking for drafting. They didn't really get it the first race. Hopefully it'll turn out to be a little bit of a better race this time. It is going to be a Sunday night race, which is because they didn't want people to die in the stands because it was going to be 105 degrees. Not only do you not want people to die in the stands, you never want the drivers to have any problems. They're going to lose about 10 pounds in sweat. You'll hear probably 7 or 8 times during the race itself. And I want to say last time that they ran here, someone's fan went off and they were really struggling. Either way, one thing to explain. So this is normally a breakdown that I do for all of the articles and all the cheat sheets. I was doing cheat sheets on Twitter way before I started writing the articles. But I always like to point out things like how many cautions there were, just to see if you know if it was a wreck fest. Like this one, 15 cautions for 59 races, for 59 laps is nuts. Plus, it also gauges how many fastest laps you'll be able to get. You'll get laps led for caution laps. You don't get fastest laps for caution laps. So, it's a way to gauge. There's no real way to absolutely know how the race is going to play out. I would imagine there are going to be about 25 to 30 caution laps this week. Yeah, probably around 30 caution laps this week. So that'll be 30 laps fewer to get fastest laps points. So that's 15 fewer fastest laps points. Do with that information what you want. You can't really game plan for those. But it's just always good to keep in the back of your mind. Put the race leaders. I'm going to start putting where they started, where they finished. So as you can see, Harvick started on the pole, finished 4th, and that's why he ended up not making it onto the perfect lineup, because Logano was similarly priced, but he started 10th and finished 1st, and then led only 2 fewer laps. Truex even outscored him just on place differential, and I'm guessing there's some fastest laps in there too, and that's how he ended up getting past Harvick. Usually you'll see, I didn't have it written down, I'm sorry about that, but usually you'll see like there was one race where there were just 2 drivers that ran out front and stayed up front. You had another one dominator race, but you'll see a little spread out, and last year it was pretty much spread out too. Last race here it was pretty much spread out too, so I feel like that's going to happen again. I'm hoping that it's going to be a lot less single file and more drafting. Now as the playoffs have started, the race for the front is going to be very interesting, because obviously if you win, you're in to the next round. You don't have to worry about pointing your way through. So the top 5 is going to be interesting to see, and I'm sure the last 20 laps are going to be hold on to your seat. Getting there might be a little stressful. It's going to be a normal schedule. Practices Friday, qualifying Saturday, races Sunday. So they're spreading it out a little bit. If you guys have any questions, I would love you guys to reach out on Twitter. You can reach out on Twitch. I'm going to put this on YouTube also, but I don't have a site for that yet, so I'm going to upload it. Uh, Thanks for watching, and of course, check out Line Star if you can. If not, reach out to me on Twitter, and thank you very much.